Good morning. We would like, there we go. We would like to welcome you. I'm Dave Mercer. We'd like to welcome you to the Honda Forums Plaza. We'd like to give Honda a big thanks for their sponsorship of this plaza. We'd like to ask you to turn off all cell phones and beepers. And after the program, you're welcome to join other EAA members west of Aeroshell Square in the membership building. They would like to greet you there, have you join EAA, renew your membership, purchase merchandise, or whatever you would like to do there. During the question and answer session, especially with this size of an audience, please use the microphones that are supplied by the volunteers so everybody can hear the question as well as the answer. Chuck Yeager has a booth in the Federal Pavilion, so afterwards, if you'd like things signed or other questions, you'll need to go over to the Federal Pavilion and do that over there. There's probably two of you in the audience who don't know General Chuck Yeager. And for those two, he is the fastest man alive, the guy with the right stuff, Mr. Supersonic. He's been called a lot of things in his 80-plus years, but none is more fitting than a title, a true American. 59 years ago, he did something no one has ever done, piloting the experimental X-1. He flew faster than the speed of sound. The rest of the program is with General Chuck Yeager.
Thank you very much. First, I always ask this, how many of you people have been in here in this room and heard me talk before? What the hell did you come back for? That's just the way, that's a good way to kill the time. It's not easy, you know. I always try not to tell the same story twice. And since most of my life, at least the interesting part of my life, occurred more than 50 years ago, I've always had a policy if somebody tells me something that happened more than 50 years ago, it's damn lie. I always try to stay away from that. But since I've seen nobody in here that really flew with me 60 years ago, I don't have to be honest. As most of you know, I started out my career not intending to fly airplanes. I had never seen an airplane on the ground until I was 18 years old and joined the Army Air Corps in September 1941 because America was mobilizing. And I came out of a very small town in West Virginia. And I think we had about 18 boys in the senior class and about 12 gals. And when America was mobilizing, of course, recruiting types were run around town. There's a little town of only 400 people, so there wasn't much for the market. And why I went to the Army Air Corps is because the recruiter was better than the Navy Air recruiters. It's that simple. No reading or writing, and airplanes didn't mean anything to me. And so when I enlisted in the Army Air Corps on September 9th, the Army Air Corps assigned me as a mechanic because I was gifted with mechanical ability. Because my dad was in the natural gas business, and my job was to maintain the engines on these trucks and generators and his natural gas drilling engines. And we raised up. By the time I was 12, I completely disassembled and rebuilt Chevy engines, and so it's just the way of life. So I was an actual mechanic, and they made me a crew chief. And I worked on the AP6s in the beginning, before the war. And it was, everything was exploding, you might say. And then I was stationed at Moffett Field, south of San Francisco, on December 7th, 41, when the war started. And but about a month before, I noticed that being a low-ranking airman, I had to pull KP and do field potatoes and all that stuff. And I saw a notice on the bulletin board, if you want to be a pilot, and you you're 18 years of age and have high school diploma, you can apply for pilot training. The only problem is you will not be commissioned a second lieutenant when you get your wings. You'll be made a staff sergeant and you'll be a sergeant pilot. And since I fit the bill with high school diploma and was 18, I sent home and got my birth certificate, my diploma, and I applied for pilot training. I applied about the middle of November 41 before the war was started. And then I took my physical on December the 4th, 3 days before the war started. And they feel that we were warm, fresh on. And consequently, I was an average person who had never been in an airplane and could care less about it. But it was the way of getting out of KP and I went in on December the 4th to the psychologist that says, he checks out some mental capability, and he said, do you ever smoke? And I said, no, sir. He said, maybe he pulls out a cigarette, puts it in his mouth, lights it, sitting there smoking, he looked me right in the eye. I looked at him and said, I don't like girls either, doc. He said, get out. Anyway, the war started. I was moved to Victorville and was crewing AK-11 Twin Beach Bombardier trainer, and I got promoted to corporal. And then on the summer of '42, I was called up for pilot training, and that's just about the way it was. All the training was primarily gave you 60 hours in a PT-22 little wing Ryan airplane, and flying, anything that had to do with anti-coordination, I was good at it. And flying wasn't too difficult, and after my first two rides, when I scooped all over the airplane, finally got used to it, and then they gave us 60 hours in the Ryan, moved us into BT-13, 60 hours in BT-13, where we got night flying, formation flying, things, and then they whistled us to Luke Field, Arizona, T6s, where we fired air and other ground gunnery with 30 calibers and dogfighting, and that's after 6 months. Then he got your wings, and since I was a corporal all through flying school and not a cadet, when we graduated, it was said we made a staff sergeant, and the cadets were made second lieutenant. I was shipped by the instructor like the way I flew. He recommended me for fighters, and I was sent to Guatemala in March '43 in the P-39 Bell Air Force, which was an airplane that I love, and it's really a neat airplane to fly. It's basically had the Allison engine in, so that single stage roller, and it wasn't worth a damn about 15, 17,000 feet. Down low, it was tremendous. They had a 37mm cannon apart to the prop of and 250s sink to the prop, and 250s one each wing, or 430s in a wing. And it's really good airplane to buzz, and Protocol is a wild country. We just no restrictions on flying, and we killed a few people, but those were the guys that we got killed in combat, the way we looked at it. And finally, after a couple months of training, and we were flying well over 100 hours a month, air-to-ground gunnery, air-to-air, and dogfighting. Then they shipped us to Santa Rosa, California, then to Orville, California, then to Casper, Wyoming, and finally, November '43, when all of us had about 500 hours in P-39, sent us to Camp Shanks, New York, and 15,000 guys sprawled on the Queen Elizabeth and went to England. And it was really crowded, and kind of bad because it was running wide open instead ahead of the U-boats, and it's kind of amusing. They split the group up into three groups, and one group would eat while another group was sleeping, while another group was puking. That's the way it went. Everybody rotated every 8 hours. After 8 hours on the Queen Elizabeth, we landed up in Scotland and got on a train, and they sent us to a base that got it just pure mud, and England is a sorry place anyway. I just can't say anything good about it, except her daughters weren't bad. And consequently, we were supposed to get, we didn't know what kind of airplanes we were going to get. We knew we wouldn't get P-39s because there were some in North Africa and some in the Philippines because there weren't too many 39s in combat. And then finally, about January of 44, we got the word they're getting the first Mustang in Hayes Air Force. And we went up to an assembly base where they're putting these B-51s together, and consequently, a sergeant showed you how to start it, and we took off with about 16 airplanes in the pilot, and we got up, we were up at all fights having fun, and that was our checkout in the B-51. It was a B with a bird cage canopy, and had 450 in the wings, and about 8 hours of endurance. And it was a tremendous airplane. And consequently, the next day, we took off with my squadron, 16 airplanes, and ended up over Leipzig, Germany, the second flight of the airplane. But that was the way it was. And there was no, we didn't have time to go through, formal training or things like that. It just, there's the airplane, this is the way you shoot the gun, go get it. That's about the way it was, and consequently, my first 2 or 3 missions, we didn't see any German airplane. We'd escort the bombers over and stay with the box of B-17s or 24s, and we didn't see any German fighters. And then on March the 4th, we had a B-17 raid on Berlin. This is a long ways away going for a fighter, but like I say, if you could win 8 hours of endurance, we could fly anywhere in Europe and have fuel to fight and get back home. And consequently, on that first raid on Berlin on March 4th, 1944, the weather was stinking. Man, we took off out of our base, and the typical takeoff sequence was everybody lined up on the perimeter taxiway, and you went out on the runway, and the ops officer set up with the flag, and you had flights of 2, and every 8 seconds he'd send 2 airplanes off to get a squadron airborne in a 1-minute flight. It was pretty good system. And on that day, you'd go in the weather at about 1,200 feet, break out at about 27,000 feet. Hard to fly in formation in real dark clouds and things like when you get on top, you look around to find somebody to fly on their wing or get them on your wing. The integrity of your squadron is like throwing a box of matches in the wind. It's just nothing worked. And so we picked up our box of bombers, and they had a recall that canceled the mission over Berlin because of the weather. And this one box of B-17 didn't get to work, and they were smoking on east, and so my squadron stayed with them. We were split up in flights of 2 and roamed around looking for German airplanes. And then they dropped their bombs over Berlin, and we're heading back towards England. And I looked down at single 109 down under, so I got about 33,000 feet. And so I peeled over and then run the engine up wide open, headed for him, and turned the gun switch on. And when I looked, I was going so fast, well, that airplane out there, we could get spread real quick. And I really overshot, so I pulled everything back, whipped it up in the air, and then rolled his, we rolled coming under it. He never see me. I just pulled up, and it just like the picture, and pieces fly off of them, and they explode. And you got to be careful not to stay behind them, because that's where the pieces go. You got to kick a little rudder and kick a little rudder to yaw, so that pieces don't take you out of the sky. They'll knock you down if like parts of props or engines or the tail or wings come off the airplane. The 50 caliber was a real lethal weapon, and it did a very good job. And this guy flew up and then went down lower looking and ran on a Yeager 11K, a twin-engine bomber. And I only had one of the guns working because, when we first began using the 50 calibers in the B's, the feed belt went over it and back into the gun, and then the blank cartridges were ejected out of the wing. And I only had one gun working. I pulled up on the guy in the rear turret was shooting at me, and I opened up on him, and I think it killed the gunner. But I got the airplane smoking, and he went in the clouds, and I broke off and climbed back up and got somebody else on my wing and flew back and landed. That was my first kill. That was March the 4th. The next day, they sent us down to south of Port-au-Prince to hit an FW-190 field, and we got down there and got jumped by, I was flying the tail end Charlie, because by then I'd gotten promoted to flight officer. I still wasn't a second lieutenant, so I usually flying in back to the back of the bus. And consequently, we got jumped by 3 190s, and I called a break and broke back into it, and I think all three of them hit me anyway. I lost the prop and part of my left wing, and I didn't have to jump out of my airplane. It fell apart around me. And I ended up, free falling. I thought I got out of it about 18,000 feet, and I just free fall until you sort of see the ground rushing around you, and then you hop your chute. I landed in the woods, and it's, we've been trained in escaping evasion, and this is part of the early days of the war, and basically we had escape kits. We carried a silk map of Europe, or usually the area that you're flying over. You had in your escape kit, you had milk or magnesium tablets, you had sulfur powder, which was really a godsend to guys that got wounded because of infection. And I had a couple of equivalent 50 caliber cores that had fragmented. One was in my leg, and the other leg had a bunch of black in my feet and hands. And when I got on the ground, I was bleeding pretty good, so I stopped the bleeding and sprinkled sulfur drugs over the wounds. I never did get infected. It was really a neat deal. And I laid it. The Germans went through, there's not a German in the world that can catch a West Virginian in the woods. And finally got a hold of woodcutter that was buried, looked like he was poor, and that's what we've been briefed, only contact people that are poor or workers. And I couldn't speak French, he couldn't speak English, but he could see I was an American flyer. And he left and came back about an hour later with a guy who spoke English and said, you don't look very good. And I said, tell me something new. And he took me to a farmhouse, and there was a lady there, and these things, you think back on them, the way it goes, it really flows pretty good. This lady was a white Russian who had gotten out of Russia during the Revolution and moved to Germany, and then moved to France when Germany went Nazi, and she was living down near Bordeaux, France, and she spoke perfect English, French, German, and Russian, of course. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to get to Spain, because Spain was a neutral country. In the whole of Europe during the war, there were 3 neutral countries. Now, if you could get into a neutral country, being from a warring country under the Geneva Convention, then you were interned in that country, and you had to stay there until the war was over. But the American consulate would get with you and put you in a nice hotel and give you money and cigarettes and all this stuff. And it was a pretty soft life. And that basically, when I got with the French underground, those guys were really, I owe my life to them because they took me under their wing, and I traveled with them for about almost 2 months while they were you know, it's sort of a guerrilla force. And the British would drop canisters about one or two every 2 weeks full of explosives, plastic explosives, counterfeit money, bread and beef ration stamps, and ammunition and guns. And these big canisters, and they were well armed and they could exist, but they had to stay hidden in the woods all the time. They kept me with them for about 2 months, and it was interesting the way they did, and it gave me a chance to see. As luck would have it, my dad was, as I mentioned, a natural gas drilling contractor, and when he finished a hole at 3,000 feet, he put plastic explosive down the hole and then set it off. That fractured the ground, let more gas into the well. And my dad used to let me cut the fuses for the plastic explosives, and we ran it down the hole and burned. So I'm pretty familiar with plastic explosion. That's what the three Frenchmen, the Maquis, used to cut railroad line rails and things like that. And so I showed these guys how to use the timers on the fuses and set them up. So it gave me something to do. I never did go out with them when we were doing, you know, destructive work on trains or railroad tracks or convoys. I always stayed back in the woods in the camp. And finally, after about 2 months, they moved out and took me south to the Pyrenees Mountains and said, you know, Spain is that way. Now, when I say it's like Spain, I'm talking about the country was neutral. It was not fighting the Germans or the Americans or the Allies. And basically, once you got into Spain, as I mentioned, it's a soft life. You didn't have to fight no more. And consequently, in Spain, there were 1,600 American airmen that had gotten shot down over occupied France or Germany or the Netherlands or Belgium that the Frenchmen had smuggled through occupied France to the Pyrenees and got them through the Pyrenees into Spain. And a lot of them lost their lives doing it. They did a tremendous job. And I don't think even today the stupid press that we have will not give a Frenchman credit for what he did. You know, it's just too bad because that's the way it is. Switzerland is another neutral country, and Sweden. There were 800 Americans in Switzerland, and 600 in Sweden. And these are all American airmen who had gotten shot down. And once I got into Spain, I stayed there about 2 months in a nice hotel, you know, laying around the pool, and get the bath, tan, and all this. They finally, the American government went to the Spaniards. Spaniards had no access to petroleum products. I know this doesn't have a hell of a lot to do with flying, but it was just part of my life in the early days. And they had no access to petroleum products, so they had no gasoline. They used methane gas to run their vehicles. Well, the Americans said, we need to get the fighter pilots out of Spain because we're running a little short. And we can trade gasoline for them. Now, how many gallons they got for me, I don't know. But that's the way, finally, the Spaniards agreed to turn us over to the British at Gibraltar, and we were sent down about, I don't know, a couple dozen of us, and they flew us back to England, and now you got the problem. The bureaucratic deal in the military is pretty bad. You had to get all these intelligence guys, and said, said, what outfit were you from, where were you shot down, what'd you do, how'd you get to Spain, all these questions. Well, Jesus Christ, can't you tell by my accent I'm not a German? But that doesn't make any difference. So then they had called a guy down from my squadron to identify me. And this idiot named T, practical joker, walked in, looked here, I said, I never saw him before. All these turtles in and skeletons, you know. It's just one of those deals where everybody has a sense of humor, thank God. Finally, you can hear T outside the door laughing like that. So they finally realized it had been had. So I was sent back to the squadron. Now, this is a week before D-Day. And I didn't want to come home. And, I talked to colonels and generals. I said, I don't want to go home. You have to go home because you're familiar with the underground of the Maquis. And if you get shot down again, the Germans will bleed the names and places you went, and there'll be a lot of innocent people killed. And I said, well, yeah, but I don't want to go home. And we ended up, well, go back to your squadron. See, this is 5 days before D-Day. When D-Day happened, then all the Maquis surfaced as a standing army, all of French. And consequently, when D-Day came, I was back at my squadron training new pilots. And it was fun, didn't have to go fight. All the guys were surprised. I was the first guy to get back from being shot down in my group. And they, how do you escape? I said, well, I'm trained the same way you are, You sleep in haystacks in the daytime and steal chickens and turnips and to eat and move at night. And they said, well, I thought I might well have a fun. I said, well, how did you travel? And I said, well, the Frenchmen kept me in the French cat houses all the time. These guys' eyes got big. I think they were all ready to go over and bail out the next day. And anyway, that was just the way I got back. Then D-Day came, I was turned loose, and I flew from June then until February of 45. And I ended up as a captain. I shot down 13 Germans and 5 on one day. And that was a funny thing. People think, you fly combat for a year and a half. And I flew a couple hundred missions. I saw Germans aircraft on 4 of those missions. That's all. They either came up in mass or they didn't come up. And it's a big sky, and so I ended up, most of mine were in large good. 5 109s in one mission, 4 190s, shot out one of the first MA-262s, German jet. And it was a kind of war that, you either seen them, they came up, or they didn't. And it's that simple. And consequently, I came home. Now, I was a maintenance officer in my squadron because I was a trained crew chief. And I knew maintenance, and it was in my record. When I came home, they made me a basic instructor, which was, man, no life. And consequently, then, when the war ended in June or July 45, the Air Force said, okay, all of these airmen who had been shot down, mostly bomber crews, and spent time in the creek camp or German prisoner war camp, and the Badees, guys that got shot down but didn't get caught, could pick out any base in the United States you want to go to. It's kind of a gift. So I asked for Wright Field because it's the closest base of my own in West Virginia. That's the only reason I asked for it. And when I reported in up there, called flash merchants or personnel type, look at the record. Now, this is 1945. I was a 22-year-old captain with about 1,300 hours in fighters, but the thing caught their eye was I was a maintenance officer. And there was an opening in the fighter test section for a maintenance officer, and that's where they assigned me. And I had, all these airplanes, 2 hangars full of airplanes. I flew every one of them, including the P-59, the P-80, and a lot of the German and Jack airplanes brought back. It's real interesting, but I still was not a test pilot. I was just a maintenance officer. And when an airplane was worked on, I flew to make sure the systems worked before the test pilot moved in and did their thing. And then I used to put on the air shows, and I was given a chance to go to the test pilot school in 46, which I did. It wasn't easy because I only had a high school education. It was a pretty complex system. And then I started doing test work on P-84s, 80s, 83s, and other airplanes. And finally, after a few air shows, the old man liked the way I flew. And now, at this point, first, January 1947, no military pilot had ever allowed to be or do research flight. Now we're getting into the NASA arena now. And basically NACA, or National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NASA, had the responsibility for research flight. And they guarded it very jealously. Military guys could do performance, stability, weapons development, things like this, but never do research flight. And they use civilian pilots and NACA that do research flying. And there's big bonus money involved in this thing. And they did it. Now, in 1944, the Air Force realized there was a problem because of shock waves forming on the airplane. It's like T-51. I could go to 38, 39,000 feet, go straight down wide open, get up to about 0.81 Mach. And this wing, which is relatively thick, going through the air at 81% of the speed of sound, this additional distance that the air has traveled to go around the wing brought its velocity up to the speed of sound, reference the skin of the wing. When this happened, a shock wave formed on the thick part of the wing, and behind the shock wave, you got turbulent air. And the airplane shook, and we call it compressibility. But the Air Force knew that there was a problem caused by the speed of sound. And consequently, they led a contract with Bell Aircraft Company to build the X-1 rocket. XS-1, X was research, S supersonic, one first contract that the Air Force led for a research airplane. And, well, NACA moved in, took over the program, assigned their civilian test pilots to the program. And they began in 1946, they flew the X-1 20-hour flight and got it up to 0.8 Mach. Hell, we've been fighting the war at 0.8. And they're so bureaucratic that we sat there and watched the program, and it, wasn't anything we could do about it. And finally, they were getting big bonus money every time they went faster, and then they finished phase one. That was taking the airplane out to 0.8 Mach in 20-hour flights. Then phase two called to take it out to 1.1 or supersonic speed. And the civilian test pilot, Slick Goodwin, said, yeah, I'd be most happy to do that. That it cost you $150,000 bonus. And the Air Force just goes their back and said, BS. We got there's not that kind of money in the program. And the NACA, well, that's where we do business. And consequently, the Air Force had enough backbone to say, and to override the bureaucratic and the congressmen that were buddies with the NACA or NASA, and said, well, we think it's time at the Air Force got in the business of research flying. So the Flight Test Division of Wright Field took the airplane over and assigned it to the Flight Test Division. I had been to the test pilot school. My classmate was Bob Hoover. And we had another classmate named Jack Ridley, a little Okie that had a master's degree out of Caltech under Dr. Von Harmon. And we were doing this routine test work there. And when the Air Force took over, General Boyd then had the problem of, hey, who am I going to assign to fly this airplane for the first time in the military? And I was selected because I had a maintenance background and obviously could fly an airplane. And my backup pilot was Bob Hoover, who was one of the most marvelous aerobatic pilots I think in the world. And Jack Ridley went along as our brain because both Hoover and I only had a high school education. And we took the X1 to Muroc, and the old man, General Board said, get the thing above Mach 1 as soon as you can. Don't bust your butt, don't embarrass your airport. That was about the guideline that we took the airplane out. Now, what happened with the X1? The airplane, or no airplane in the world, ever been above about 83% of the speed of sound. But they wouldn't go that fast. And you can hear tails now, some after 50 years, we're driving Spitfires up to 9.4 and P-47 up to supersonic speed. It's all damn high anyway. And you learn not to believe that stuff. And so I started out, my first powered flight next when I took it out to 0.85 Mach, as fast as any airplane ever been. It was a beautiful thing to fly. But it was a pretty complex thing. We used 6,000 pounds of nitrogen gas pressure, that do all pressurized liquid oxygen thing, fuel tank, raise the gear, lower it, put the flaps down. All this was done by high pressure. We didn't have any hydraulics or generators or things like that. And then you were working pretty close to the red lines on these tank pressures and things, so you had to really watch it. Well, hell, we would use dome regulators to reduce this 6,000 pounds of nitrogen gas pressure down to a usable pressure like 1,500 pounds or 350 pounds in the tanks. Well, after the first flight, the X1, the first stage dome regulator started leaking, and the diaphragm and the dome regulator. And I never let anybody touch that X1 if I wasn't there and didn't help them do the work on it. So we pulled the first stage dome regulator out of it, and the Bell engineers sent out a couple regulator engineers. I took the damn thing apart, changed the diaphragm, and put it back together, put it in. And these engineers said, how the hell do you know what you're doing? And I said, hey man, I've changed hundreds of those in my dad's natural gas well, and the same pressures, because that's what he used on a daily basis. And they were surprised. But that's the way I fit into the X1 program. Now, what happened in the X1? We took it up. The first thing that really hit us, when we got the airplane started buffeting at about 0.88 Mach, and then as we went faster, it buffeted more. Then when we got out to 0.94 Mach, we lost elevator control. I usually try to turn the airplane when I hit the Mach number at 94 Mach. We got out there, and I rolled it over and pulled back on the controls, and man, it went the way it headed. So I braked the rockets off, and jettison the fuel came down, landed on the leg head. Just as a matter of interest, you pilots in here, the X1 stalled at 240 indicated with a full load, and touched down usually around 220 on the leg head with the airplane. Now, when I got there and lost this problem, we looked at some of the data we had. We were recording where these shock waves were on the tail. Now, at 0.94 Mach, well, 0.88 Mach, this shock wave had formed on the thickest part of the horizontal stabilizer. And then as I increased the Mach number, this shock wave moved back on the stabilizer and began to lay down. And at 94 Mach, it was the hinge point of the elevator, and we lost the elevator effectiveness. And that was, landed. I told the guy, I said, man, we got a problem. And we said, well, let's put this thing over. And Bell had built the capability, the tail of the X1, and most of you, I see two engineers back here, they'll understand it. And this, we did the leading edge of the horizontal stabilizer was a jack screw. And an air motor on the top and an air motor on the bottom. And I could select it with the solenoid that run the top motor one way, and they would change the angle of incidence of the horizontal stabilizer, or run the other motor and bring it back. And we never used it in any of the previous flights, so we took the panel off the side of the vertical, squared 3 and 1 all on this jack screw and ran it up and down. It worked pretty good. And then we took it up to try to fly with the horizontal stabilizer only. It's pretty crude, and you bounce on the, head on the ceiling or sink in the seat. And I got it up and tried it out, and it works pretty good. And I came down, and Jack and I had discussed it. He said, just make small increments in his tail, and I think you can control this thing through Mach 1. And next flight I took it up and used only the horizontal stabilizer to fly the airplane, and took it out to 0.94 Mach. And lo and behold, I cranked the leading edge down to 9.4, where it lost the elevator effective, and the airplane's for about 3 G, and I retrimmed it back to 0 to straighten it out. I said, we got it made. And the very next flight, I took it up, I got up to 9.6, 9.65 indicated, and the airplane was beginning to nose up at about 9.6, so I was pushing about 9.9 through Mach number. As the airplane began to nose up, I just cranked the leading edge up on stabilizer, kept the nose down, and then the Mach meter only went to 1.0. Probably didn't have a hell lot of confidence in it. That's the only instrument we had. And the airplane went, the Mach meter jumped from about 9.8 off the scale. And when it did, boy, the nose really went down on the X1. I cranked the leading edge down, kept it up level, and run it out to about 106, 107 if you extrapolate, and kept it out there about 20 seconds, and then braked off the engine and decelerated and went back to this pitch down and up. And then jet fuel came on down landed. Now, what does that tell you? If you're going to operate in the region of speed of sound or supersonic speed, you got to have a flying tail. And that really opened up Pandora's box to the American aircraft industry. The F-86 was on the drawing board being developed, and we put it first on the F-86A electrically trimmed horizontal stabilizer, then the E and the F, we put it hydraulically actuated, and it took the British and the French and the Soviet Union 5 years to find out that was true. It was pretty interesting to be involved in that sort of thing. And then when Lieutenant comes up and noticed North Korean pilot defected in the South Korea with the MiG-15 in 1954, I was sent over there to do the flight test work on the MiG-15, and this is 7 years that we broke the Mach 1 and put flying tail on the F-86 that was in combat against the MiG-15, and lo and behold, the MiG-15 had a fixed horizontal stabilizer. It was amazing to me, and it wasn't worth a damn above 9.4 Mach. And that's just the way of the rest. The same way with the Hawker Hunter that the British built. Man, it would dive up to about 9.8, but at fixed horizontal stabilizer. I did a lot of work with the Dassault company in France and the French Air Force, testing all of their fighters and bombers. Same way, they had fixed horizontal stabilizers. And it took them quite a while to learn that. That's the reason every airplane you go there and look at, if it's supersonic, like X-16, 15s, 18s, or things like that, you see a slab tail. It's all fun. That's all you need. And it worked out. That went on, flew the X-1A out to 2.5 Mach, or around 1,600 miles an hour. Got into inertia coupling, tumbling, because the tail was too small. And we then, like the X2, made out of stainless steel, got the first airplane to get above Mach 3. Male act on his checkout ride in the airplane, killed himself because it also got into inertia coupling. And I had a lot of experience, in unusual positions. So when I got in that problem with the X-1A at 80,000 feet and 2.5 Mach tumbling, it just through pure instinct, I recovered the airplane doing an inverted spin and then an normal spin, popped it out, and then came back to Lake landing. And because I had a lot of experience, that first ride in the X2, Mach 3 got killed. But that's the way we figured it worked. And we went on into the technology of stealth that you're familiar with, and computer flight control systems. And now in artificial intelligence, when you look at remote airplanes like the Global Hawk and the Predator, it's just the aviation world has turned into a very lethal field. And we're getting into mixed lasers with chemical and electrical that'll melt a missile at 125 miles in the atmosphere. And it's a pretty lethal arena. And that's where the United States has stayed a great distance ahead of the rest of the world in aviation technology because of the research program. Now, when we took the X1 away from NACA, then the NACA became national. Then we moved into the X2, X3, X4, X5, which I put them all identified. X2, I'll put them 3, 4, and 5. And I didn't fly the X15 because I left, went back into tactical below the squadron commander of 86 in Germany. But then everything that was done in research was the Air Force were allowed to do it. And we had guys that proved because of their duty and not fly from like the NACA guys and the like. And then I have to tell you a little bit that's, I'm sure, news to you who are strange to you. In 1961, I took over the U.S. Air Force Tech College School. And the Air Force wanted to get into space. So what we did, we changed the name of the school to the Aerospace Research College School, built a whole space mission simulator for rendezvous and docking with the GV rocket. This is all with computer technology. And we also went into reaction control trainers, built them in-house. And for 4 years, we trained 26 guys for the U.S. Air Force Space Program. NASA didn't exist. And this is strange to a lot of you. I know because it wasn't publicized too much. But basically, the school was doing, we had an X-20 dinosaur, reusable space vehicle. We had a man over at the laboratory, the mobile program, and basically would have been a miniature space station. And we're involved in space weapons systems. I was the commandant for that. Through those 6 years, we had our own budget, did our own contracting with Singer sewing machine for our simulator, and computer technology was so plentiful, we could do just about anything. And then in 1965, President Johnson and others decided if we can make space for peaceful purposes, then the Russians won't develop space weapons systems. Kind of a stupid analogy, but that's the way it worked out. Then it said, and then they formed NASA, a civilian organization, to run the space program, and they jumped everything that they took our whole space mission simulator, our reaction control trainers, and things like that. And in 1965, the old Aerospace Research Pilot School converted back to the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School, and the military was wiped out of space. And I left school and went to Vietnam for 2 years, got back into the fighting war. And it was kind of a sad situation, but that's just the way it worked. You don't read a hell of a lot about it because it was, I think, a rather embarrassing time for our administration. And basically, I retired in 75. Edwards came to me, said, you know, since you spent most of your life in research flying, how about working as a consultant test pilot at Edwards? And as long as you can pass physical, you can fly anything that comes in and work as a working test pilot. I said, how much am I paying? $1 a year? I said, that sounds like a pretty good deal. I said, I don't have to buy the fuel to go. He said, no. And anyway, I worked from 1975 up through 2003. 2003, I turned 80 years old and finished 62 years in Air Force College. And I said, I led an interesting life. I spent my last 2 years as Director of Safety for the Air Force, but the previous 2 years were the most interesting to me as a fighter pilot. In 71, 2, and 3, I served in Pakistan with the Pakistani Air Force for the war with India for 2 years. And I flew with some of the best pilots that I've ever flown with, and those were Pakistani fighter pilots. And they were very, very good. And it was interesting in a different country, a different lifestyle. And I flew a lot. We were quite superior to the Indian pilots, because Indian pilots were trained by the Russians and the Pakistani pilots were trained by the U.S. Air Force. And it was, guys were very, very good. And so I had a little experience in the Cold War. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, we'll open it up for questions. And I always say this, and you all just don't listen. I said, I'm not going to sign any autographs. When I get out, I got another appointment, and we'll answer questions for another 10 minutes or so. And be sure that you get on the mic, because after sitting behind Packard-built Merlin engines with straight pipes 4 feet in front of me for 8-hour missions, I can't hear a damn thing.
Please raise your hand, and the person with the mic will hold the mic close to your mouth and speak slowly and clearly. And I'll try and repeat it if we have a communication problem.
Could you tell us about your last mission in Europe?
My last mission? It's embarrassing. I was wound up in a combat tour on January 14, 1945. And I got another guy. We took 2 P-51, took all the spares to the squadron. 16 airplanes, 2 spares. If nobody aboard, you got 4 flights aboard, nobody aboard, you're supposed to go back home. And when they broke the coast, nobody aboard, I headed for Switzerland. And we'll come down there and drop the tanks, put them out like straight and head on down through Lake Annecy to the Mediterranean, across through the Pyrenees. And I was in the air about 7.5 hours. And we came back just before dark and landed and went into our arch, and man, here comes all these guys running. Boy, I said, oh, Christ. They said, how many did you shoot down? Because when we sprayed our tanks on the top of Mount Blanc, we keep tape over the end of the gun barrel to keep water out of them, and to keep the tape blowing off naturally. And what are you talking about? And, yeah, the group, man, they shot down 57 German fighters on that mission. That, man, we missed the biggest air battle of the war. That was my last mission. So I was controlling something, now I might have got shot down. Over here.
What engine did you have in your P-51 when you started in England?
Let me tell you something, and if there's any British here, just forgive me. We got to England in November, I'm leading up to something. We got to England in November 43, and we left there in summer 45. We hit it, I think the British version did the German. We were fighting the Germans, and they were a rude bunch of people. Well, there was never an American-built Mustang with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in it. Every engine that we put in American fighters was a Packard-built Merlin. And there were a few built by Continental, but the Packard engine was a hell of a lot, in my opinion, and being a maintenance officer, I looked at a few Rolls-Royce engines. We had better clearances and a better engine in the Packard-built Merlin. It was made in America. Question right over here.
Thank you. You mentioned that there were 20 pilots that you trained in your aerospace program. Where did those 20 pilots go when the program was shut down?
20 pilots trained in the program. Where did they go when the program was shut down?
The test pilot school.
The test pilot school.
Aerospace, aeronautical.
What happened to them?
Where did it go?
It reverted back to the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School where it is today, and we've trained 2 classes of 20 pilots a year as trained test pilots to do test work in the Air Force. And then we train Navy pilots, we train foreign pilots, and it just reverted back to it. It's unfortunate, but that's what happened. Okay, right there.
Did you fly any combat in Pakistan?
Yeah. we're in the field here. 3s, Mirage 5s, F-104s, MiG-19, B-57. And that's what Pakistani did. They did an excellent job. We armed all the fighters with Sidewinder missiles, including the MiG-19, and they did it. And the Indians were flying Su-7 fitters, Sukhoi fitters, MiG-21J with a gun, and some Hawker Hunters. And the guys really blasted them out of the sky and went with the Sidewinder.
Way in the back.
Could you tell us about the bear hunt with Ridley and Hoover?
It's embarrassing. But also Russ Slade was involved in this. We were at the Ponchos after a hard day of work. And I think it was on Friday evening, and somebody told Russ Slade that, and said, let's go bear hunting. And I said, well, we got to get some guns. He said, I've got a 38 revolver. I'll go swing that out, pick up 8mm rounds. We gave Hoover a 22 bump. And Hoover had a 1947 Roadmaster convertible, leather seats and a rag top. So we all got hit, and we were pretty well hammered by the time we left Ponchos. And when we got up there, we were really hammered. And we went to the garbage dump, but we're bigger bears than we parked where we turned the lights on the garbage dump. We had another drink and 2 sleeping bags. And so we fit, and Russ Slade and Hoover won the sleeping bags. And they got outside spitting snow and cold. And you were laying this stupid ragged out car. And it was cold in that damn thing. Really start the engine about every hour and get the engine heater warmed up. We get warmed up and then we go back to sleep. And after about 3 hours, we heard this dog scream. Hoover, I'm back here to dog it. And then we got them shooting. This old Hoover used to have nightmares. He was in this mummy sleeping bag with staff. When the one where he knows he dreaming the bear was licking him. He couldn't get out of the sleeping bag and he rolled over the hill. And old Slade thinks it's a bear, he starts shooting at him. Of course, Slade couldn't get him down. He got down the bottom and Hoover screamed, got down and quit shooting at him. We all got out and it was, no place to be this extra live. We had another drink and went down to the logging camp and had breakfast with a bunch of loggers and came home Sunday. That was Slade. Oh, I said, he's right. He said, yeah, I was shooting at some bitch out of hit him. But anyway, that's the way we lived. And one thing that you have to do in combat or in research flying because of the loss of life involved, basically you have to develop a sense of humor. And that's the way we never lost that sense of humor, even in combat or in flight test, because if you did, it'd get good. And that's about it. Anyway, been fun. Thank you very much for
Thank you, General Chuck Yeager. Thanks to